Hey guys, we are the Latter-day Disciples. Our team is dedicated to helping you boldly live the gospel, recognize the signs of the times, and prepare for the return of our Savior, Jesus Christ. We invite you to join us in our mission through our daily and weekly podcast series, connecting with us on social media, and visiting latterdaydisciples.com. We pray you are enlightened and empowered through this podcast episode. Thank you for joining us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Latter-day Disciples podcast. I am so grateful to be joined today by Katie Hansen. Katie was born with a heart that naturally seeks and finds. After growing up exploring and discovering the woods, ponds, creeks, and fields in the Maryland countryside, she embarked on a path of seeking to understand truth in this world and then how to teach that truth in a Christ-like way, touching the hearts and minds of others. After receiving a bachelor's degree in teaching, she received a call to teach her own children and has spent the last 25 years studying servant leadership education, teaching youth and adult classes, mentoring with women in her community, serving on boards, and studying the Hebrew way from the language itself. Through that experience, building foundation within herself and sharing from a sincere desire to serve in God's kingdom, she has begun fulfilling one of her life calls to assist in the restoration of our original culture and story through Foundation Builder Guides, Original Hebraic Sources Study Program, and Facilitator Mentoring Community. Katie is the author of the Early Semitic Pictographic Alphabet book and her upcoming book, The Hebrew Model, Restoring Our Original Culture and Story, as well as over 20 children's stories sharing the Hebraic principles of creation through principle-based messages. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for having me and thinking about me, at least reaching out and everything. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Well, you were a guest recommendation from one of our listeners. And actually, I had heard your name a couple of times. So I'm pretty sure that we have a number of people in our community that are aware of you and the Foundation Builders Guide and the work that you're doing. And so I appreciate those recommendations when I receive them. I definitely want to talk to anyone that our audience finds value in who's sharing a message that needs to be heard. And I definitely feel like you felt in that category. It took us a little bit of time to connect. I know that both of us have had a very busy summer, but I'm a firm believer, and I've seen through almost 3 years of doing the podcast that our guests come at the moment that our guests are supposed to be here. And so I'm really excited and grateful for this conversation. The topic that you picked out today is one that I'm very fascinated to know what you mean by. I think it hasn't been quite as intuitive to me. And I think that means that it's going to be really important and really good for us to talk about. So, we're going to talk today about living a life of co-mission. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, your story, and how it is that the Lord led you into this beautiful ministry that's kind of unique? I feel like you cover a lot of different bases. You're kind of a Renaissance woman with the work that you're doing. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it just began with my reading the Book of Mormon, I could say, going back to when I was 19 and really committing to follow a prophet and asking us to read the Book of Mormon 30 hours, sorry, 30 minutes a day. And that was a really hard thing for me. And I just got to the bottom of my pit at that time and living away from home for the first time and deciding that I needed to do it right now, no matter what. And I did, and I saw my life change, and I saw my desires change. There was a progressive increase of desire to serve God and help others through that experience. Dreams. I started having dreams, and I saw myself going to the temple in a specific month. So I started to prepare for that. There was still stuff in me that I needed to weed out and things, but that brought me to the temple. It brought me back to my desire to have family. and Mary in the temple. And I feel like there was a lot of opposition, a lot of things that Satan was trying to pull me out, but that happens. And that started right there, just when I became sealed to my spouse and began to understand things that my blessing talked about that I had never asked before, I never wondered about. And like specifically, I mean, that is really where it begins, like me seeking and asking what my patriarchal blessing talks about. And it tells me what to study, tells me to learn about the Abrahamic covenant, tells me to study the ancient and modern prophets so that I can be prepared for my mission, and talks about teaching and becoming a Christ-like teacher. Along that journey, it led me through a journey of seeking to understand how to teach in that way. And I first began with teaching my own children. I kind of went through school just knowing that I never wanted to teach in the public school system after that experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, maybe I'll teach privately, but and it made sense when everything came together. Like I knew at 8 that I wanted to be a teacher, and school didn't make a lot of sense to me until I got into teaching, and then it just made more sense. And I got my first A's. And I started to read and more, and it just helped me blossom as a person. But going through the journey of studying and learning how I might become a better teacher with my own children, and evaluating what I did right and what I have done wrong, and this isn't the way. And I went through a period of falling asleep and forgetting the inspiration and the insight, the light, the dreams I had had. And then after my 4th child, I got to the bottom of my pit again. And in my health, I was pregnant with him, actually. And I finally found the right question that I needed to ask about how can I have a change of heart. And because I saw myself, like, I did really well, I felt like I was doing really well with my children. But then I as we moved and more chaos happened in life, then I wasn't being myself. I wasn't living in those value system that I had sought for and was seeking for. And so I wondered and pondered on that for several years. Like, what is it in me? And I thought it was outside of me, but then I started to feel the prompting that it's cleanse the inner vessel. So I've had just that refining, the beginning refining, I guess. And I went to the Lord on my knees that night when I found that question. And he said, well, I heard an audible voice. I don't know which of my angels said it, I don't know. But he said, read the Book of Mormon in 2 weeks. And I was pregnant, about 8 months pregnant. And I literally opened my eyes and said, how am I going to do this? Like, with 3 other kids, and we just had moved into this old house. And so I went on to not do it yet. I had my baby. It got even harder at 6 months, and I realized, I can't do it anymore. I try it myself, right? And then I hit another wall. So I just said, I'm doing it right now. And I calculated it out, like, how many hours do I have to be reading? And it was about 2 hours. And I just sat down, and no one knew what was going on in my head. I was just in my head about it. And so I just sat down in my lounge chair with my baby and started reading. Anyway, it took me 19 days. In that year following it, I saw a just a shift every quarter. It was like a clock I saw, and every quarter of the year, it was like I learned this whole new thing, or I saw myself like seeing differently. And I was like, what happened to me? And I kind of forgot that I read the Book of Mormon. Like I forgot that I didn't realize there would be such a drastic change, but he gave me situations so that I could
Mm.
see. And then at the end of the year, I was sitting in the kitchen, just, it had been exactly a year. And I said, oh my gosh, it was the Book of Mormon. Like it changed my life. And it again. So um, that's where I had people come into my life after that point, and mentors to help me get out of my stuck place, um, in my house with my kids, and just kind of being a little not knowing what to do, but expanding, helping me to see differently, helping, like I started studying outside of my home with in classes with mentors, and I all along I was seeking for, what do you want me to do here? What's my mission? What's um anyway, so it did take me about 7 years to wake up in the progressive place. I started keeping a journal and a record that helped give me evidence that I was being that I was being guided. Like I can go back to my journals, and there were questions I was asking or dreams I had. And when I went back, I could see, like 3 weeks later to this question, there was a dream. And then this happened, and then this happened. It's just this, my notebook became the evidence that God was guiding me when I couldn't see it. And I was asking, this is so random. Like, what is it? What does he want me to learn from this? And I'd have these new people show up, um, and it just happened one thing after the other with very specific people that came into my life, asking me to help them. I, it just, the puzzle pieces came together. And when it did, it just was this huge, I just got this huge vision of like seeing it all together and seeing uh, deep connections, that it's almost like I just learned it so fast. And I had learned it over the years, as well as learning new things. I just picked it up faster um, than I can describe it. And then I started to know, it's hard to explain, but um, it just all came together, and I was pulling from all these resources that I had collected all the years, and I put on my shelf. Oh yeah, this is for something, and it all came together. So does that answer your question? What got
Yeah.
me started?
Yeah, it's beautiful, and
On
I appreciate it. I think it's so helpful for us to hear other people's experiences, and for you, I think that and perhaps this is a really true principle, is that you had to go through this spiritual death and rebirth as a part
Mhm.
of understanding what your mission is. And I think that that's a really, probably a very true thing. And I, it strikes me that, reading the Book of Mormon, obviously the Book of Mormon is incredible. It's such a wonderful source of light and truth to us. But for you, I think that there was a bigger layer in that was the way that the Lord knew he could break your heart enough for you
Mhm.
to make a sacrifice of a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And it was something so simplistic and something loving, right? Something beneficial, but it was a sacrifice. It was a major sacrifice. And it was enough to kind of push you over the edge, I guess, in a way to help you really turn to the Lord and just say, take it. Like, I just can't
Mhm.
do this myself. And when you made that sacrifice, I think it's interesting that it took 19 days, right? It wasn't 14 days, so it wasn't like the letter of the law,
It
right?
wasn't perfect, yeah.
Right? But God accepted that. God accepted that and then took you on this incredible journey over the next year of teaching you, changing your heart, changing your mind and your perception, the way that you see things, and really giving you new eyes, And I think that that's incredible. And I think there's so many beautiful principles to be gained just from that story. So thank you so much for sharing
Mhm.
that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Going from your experience to our topic today, living a life of commission. So first things first, can you define what what is commission? What does that mean to you? And for listeners, I think that it's CO hyphen mission, right? I was
Mhm.
like squishing it for a second and thinking commission, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. So it's co-mission. What does that phrase mean to you?
Well, to me, at first, there has to be a mission to have a commission. And coming to walk this path, I realized that um, like I was seeking mission and what I was here to do on this earth. I knew that only God could teach me that, maybe because of my blessing. I can't remember exactly, but I knew that. I mean, I think intuitively, right? We know that we came from God, and we are seed and offspring of Him. So um, He has given us a purpose. We've heard these questions our whole life. Who am I? Where am I going? Why am I here? And they were very generic questions, but through my experience, I came to really understand who I am through the journey he has walked with me and guided me through. And so the first, we have to understand mission. Each of us were born for a purpose here. We each have our individual genius, and it's a divine genius. It goes with your individual, or each of our individual intelligence, and who we are as an intelligence and who we are as a spirit child in heaven. And I, through my experience, I can add to that to say that there is a blueprint that we carry with us in our bodies. And when we can tap into healing enough and to Christ in the ways that he is outlined in the scriptures, that comes out naturally. And if it's unlocked through these things, through the right environments that will nourish the seed and help that seed grow, because that it, like within a seed there is a potential, and that potential is hidden until it's in the right environment to sprout and to grow into a tree, right? So I think defining mission is important as the reason we came here and the purpose for which we're here and what we're here to do. And as we all should seek our mission, we should put it in context with that we are here because God has sent us here, and he is the one that knows why we're here. He's the one going to bring the people in our lives. He's going to help create the right conditions for our heart. He knows our plan individually. And to make it our missions with him is a co-mission. And I kind of think that the Doctrine and Covenants really, it says it here. It says that you may be prepared in all things when I shall send you again to magnify the calling wherein I have called you, and the mission with which I have commissioned you. And I mean, I guess it is in a different way. I wrote it in a different way. This is in Doctrine and Covenants 88, verse 80. So I look at it like I, um, I am living this mission with my Father as my guide, and with the gifts that he sent me, and the purpose that he knows. And so I feel like I am commissioned in this way, but it's almost like living my mission with God.
Mm.
Does that define it right
Yes.
enough? For
I
I mean,
love
you can
that.
write it these
I
days.
love the dual meaning, and I think that that actually happens more than we think when certain words are used. I think that more often than not, God could mean all the different ways that word means. And so I love the idea of being commissioned first, being commissioned, like you have a commissioner, right? Where you're given an assignment, you are put in a
Mhm.
position, you are endowed with the rights and authority and stewardship, right? The stewardship or stewardship that's associated with that call. And then also a commission, as in, yes, I am serving this particular mission with somebody else, right? That I have a partner in this. And I think that that's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. It really resonates with me, and it's an idea that I've had for a long time that our mission, you could say, is the granular individual plan of our personal salvation, right? When we talk about the plan of salvation, we often think of like the overarching, the diagram on the Sunday school chalkboard plan of
Yeah,
salvation. And I think that that is a really like kind of fundamental way to look at it. But even more, I think that there's a very specific plan for my individual salvation and your individual salvation. And it's so well planned that everything in our life is completely on purpose at all times. And it's not just that there's no coincidences, it's that everything is the opposite of coincidence. And when you start to see your life that way, I think that that helps to identify like, oh, these are the things that are coming to me. These are the talents that I have. These are the people that God has put in my life. And that will kind of naturally guide you to define that mission and then develop the co-mission, right, with God.
yeah. I think that you have to recognize, like exactly, you summed it up well. Just recognizing that there is really a specific reason this person was put into my life, and what am I to learn from it, and then living that. So, I mean, I think that is key. You have to be really actively noticing all the things. Like, for example, I remember being moved to a place and being put in the same neighborhood and ward as this friend that I have, but I didn't know her then. I just had heard her name, and she was in the community of home educators seeking to leadership education and seeking to understand the servant leadership and how to teach in a better way. So I was in this community, and I had heard her name, and I was like, "You're kidding me." I moved into her ward. Like, it was a shock to me. And I just I like didn't know her, and I feel like I had judgment, like, again, like, about her, just in my head, like, and just had this guy that didn't want me to connect with her. And I got to know her. It took me a couple years to get to know her, actually, even though she was up my street. But I realized, like, there is a reason. It was so black and white, and I could see it and recognize there's a reason why I'm here. And I just started taking notes when I was with her. Like, why am I here? And I would watch her teach, and I would be like, "Oh my gosh, she's like amazing." And so it's like, when we realize that the coincidences are just not even there. It's really a deliberate path and guidance that you're
Mhm.
being offered. Then we can see it more clearly,
Mhm.
the, the path and
Yeah. Yeah.
that individual journey.
Totally. Well, and I think that, as you said before, healing really is a big part of that, right? Because there was something in you that demonic voice was playing off of, right? To keep you
Mhm.
from recognizing that there was purpose in this relationship, this pull that you guys felt to each other. I love that you're so in tune with angels and demons that you could hear that it was a masculine voice that was talking to you. I think that's so awesome. But yeah, the Satan only can work with so much, right? And like it's the things inside of us that he uses against us more often than not. And so being able to identify like what are the parts of me that are being exploited right now because I haven't been healed
Yeah.
sufficiently by Jesus Christ. I think that's a really big deal. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
How to identify? Okay, say the question again.
Yeah, like just recognizing that the things that are inside of me that are unhealed are the things that the adversary is going to
Mhm.
exploit. So how is it that we identify that we go about healing it so that we can recognize these non-coincidences that are all a part of our broader mission?
When the idea of the mirror, like things that you encounter are a mirror for you or for us, when that first came, it was really vague and really hard to hear. Like I couldn't wrap my head around it. But um, I think first the idea that I heard was cleanse the inner vessel. Like I already was saying, what does that mean? Yeah, I gotta work on this inside me, outside me. I was working, trying to create order so that I felt in order
Mm.
in my journey. But I didn't recognize that healing needed to happen and that order needed to happen in here. And so I was on a layer by layer
Mm.
journey to try to wrap my mind around that process. And when that thought of the when you something bugs you inside, that shows you that there's something in you that needs to be healed. The first time I have a great experience with it was when I read Pride and Prejudice, and I had a whole month to learn this principle, and I read Beware of Pride at the same time, and and then I had a person at the same time that I love, someone that I love that was in my life, and the situations came in that month that I was starting to see, I started to see myself being bugged. And for the first time, I was saying, wait a minute, why am I bugged? Like, and because I was reading Beware of Pride and Pride and Prejudice and listening to Pride and Prejudice, I was kind of doing a reading and listening and having these situations. I started to see, oh, that's me.
Mhm.
That's in me. That's my issue.
Yes.
And then I just learned it really well in that month. I loved that project that God gave me,
Right?
and I really, for me, it was like doing a lot of reading and discussing of and having that like group that moves me along to read a book and by a deadline so I can discuss it. It was motivation for me. So having that aspect as well, it just made the learning just go even deeper because I was taking notes. I was trying to follow the story and see what patterns or whatever I can learn from the story. So I was more open. Um, and then God gave me that beautiful experience to learn from. So from that point on, I could wrap my mind around, okay, so when I am in a situation and I've seen this situation before, like it keeps happening, there's a repeat in my life where I keep meeting these kind of people or experiencing these kind of situations. That became more prevalent, like that I could look inward. So it came like through a
Mhm.
process of like, then it was like, oh boy, I got to do work, right? And so I had to work through some healing within me for several years and before it could come to a point where I'm instantly like, oh, I get that. I can see it in me.
Mm.
Does that make sense? I
That's
think
so good.
with
Yeah.
our awakening, it takes a process. So
Yeah.
hopefully
No,
that
I
makes sense.
I love that. You shared so much wisdom. And I think that that's really smart that like if you are noticing a a mote in somebody else's eye, you should just assume that it's actually your beam that you're seeing.
Mhm.
Like in psychology, we talk about this principle of projection, right? That's like
Yeah.
I'm experiencing something in here but I don't see that. I'm just identifying it in somebody else and I'm saying that you're the problem when really it's me, right? And it's this like ingrained human hypocrisy that we have. And I found that it actually is really helpful to say I'm being triggered by this behavior that I'm witnessing in someone else. I'm making judgments. I'm assuming that they're doing this. I am feeling like
Mhm.
I'm the victim. Just stop right there, hold a mirror up to yourself and say that I'm the problem. I'm the problem. And that's really hard to do. Like, that's really uncomfortable, but that is repentance in a big way, is being willing to recognize like, oh, this is a thing that's in me. And if you ask, like the Lord will totally give you those like hands-on learning experiences.
Yeah, and he'll like show you right here
Yes.
inside your mind. And yes, very
I had a
much.
similar thing when I was in the MTC, early on in my mission, obviously, because I was in the MTC. In Doctrine and Covenants 4, it has all these qualities, right, that you want to be developing as a missionary. And there was a time during my first 9 weeks where, like, every day was a different one of those principles. And it was like hardcore.
Amazing.
Everything was testing
Oh,
my patience, my love, my temperance, my brotherly kindness. And like, it was the theme of the day. And that was really brutal, but it was really sanctifying as well, like you said.
yeah, wow. Wow,
Yeah.
what a fast course you had. That's amazing.
That's kind
That
of how God works with me. Yeah. Very, very quick and painful. Yeah. So what would you, going back to this topic and something else that you mentioned as to this aspect of healing. And then I'll turn it over to you and we'll talk about Abraham because I know we want to talk about Abraham in this process as well. But one of the things that you mentioned that are really key is creating an environment where we are safe enough to really see and explore these different things. I think more often than not, well, I guess I won't make a generalization like that. But I will ask, what do you think are some of the key things that we need to be doing to cultivate an environment that will help us identify our mission?
okay. That's a good one. Um, Key things. They're definitely the most the first key thing I think is putting our allegiance in alignment with God, and in like what we've said, in learning how to read and learning how to increase our reading skills, or going deeper in our reading and maybe seeking and going through that process and maybe coming to a place where we love reading or we love learning enough. Does that make sense? So starting at the beginning, we have to have a born of God experience. That so God is the first environment, and he will help us through our process to heal and bring people in or guide us to places. But as we show our allegiance to him, then we and and the laws that we've covenanted to keep, or the like say it, if someone is not taking covenants, I think naturally it could happen as they are just they feel that love inside of them, and they are cherished as a person and they're whole, and they have curiosity. So after we and I think reading is a part of it, because it's we can learn so much more when we are readers, and we can do so much more as readers.
Mm.
And then it's not just reading, it's about discussion. And when we are discussing, we can add writing onto that, and experiencing, answering questions, going through journaling, taking notes, writing in all kinds of ways. Um, and when you're in that environment, I have experienced that you want to read more, you want to learn more. There's more, but that like that maybe as an adult. So there could be an adult process of, and then a child. But in I think the next part would be invitation to curiosity, using curiosity, having someone ask us questions, having someone to wonder ask questions so that our brain and our mind is set to wondering. So I can go back and forth as a facilitator or as a learner. Does that make sense? And I see
Mm-hmm.
it both ways. But if we look at ourselves, are we? I feel like the love of God just brings forth naturally that love of learning and
Mm-hmm.
that seeking, um, and seeking deeper to understand and maybe observe patterns. I love Elder Bednar's Quick to Observe article,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that turned into his books, 2012, and he illustrates it there. And I identified this, and I feel like it's in the Doctrine and Covenants 88 as well. But he's talking about asking, how shall we learn? How shall we dig? How shall we do this? And it's talking about asking, seeking, and knocking. And so as I studied that, I came up with this little formula that it helps me to guide others as I teach, but helps me to know the process of how my mind works. But first, we need to observe, and then to like and notice and really see and I love that, just observance, and then explore more, maybe not think that we know it or have it. And that's a challenge with our mind, because our minds want to just resolve. And that thalamus gland in our mind just wants to resolve, like it's seeking to solve the problem, and then it just wants to be done. And so we have to always, as we have to be aware that this is how our mind works and how we need to push through it and say, wait, what else could it be?
Mm-hmm.
So as we're in environments where there could be more and we're asked to seek more, then we naturally will look more. And sometimes we're like, oh, I already told you, I already gave you the answer. Like, I'm done. And I'm asking my kids, like, well, what else is there? Like, what else do you see? What are other options does God have in your life? Um, I think that using those skills, and I call them skills of discovery, then they can help our mind. Like, we can use them to help our mind as a learner, and we can use them as a facilitator or teacher or guide to help other learners to
Mm-hmm.
seek more. So there, that environment of invitation, and whether it's to play or an invitation to create through projects, or um, to do something harder like study and read deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of us will stop there. A lot of us will just be satisfied, like we're learning and we've heard it and we know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're writing is another great environment that would help. And these are just general environments, but writing will help us to see what we're thinking. It'll help us to see what we're receiving, and and it's simple. I think we could be intimidated by writing, the aspect of writing. We don't have to write papers. We can write journal entries. We can write stories. We can write dreams. We can keep a notebook by the side of our bed and just record thoughts. We can carry it with us and just capture small thoughts. And knowing that there's a place to put it, then, and we have a pen and we have a consistency with it, I believe that we receive more.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that definitely has developed my ability to recognize my mission, and at least this mission, because my first and foremost mission is being a wife and a mother, and that trumps everything. But I know that they're going to develop their missions, or they're going to have their calls and their families. And so I feel like as a mission as a mom is to model it for my children. And so I've just decided that I can get on that learning path with them and show them what it looks like. And so I went through these processes of trying to put my alignment back always with Christ and developing a love of learning. I didn't love reading, especially with I have my first two children. They're, and it's just something I had to push for, and I knew it was good, but for me, it was always hard growing up, and I it just came easier and easier. Does that make sense? Like the desire we have to read, because we're inheriting, and all of us are being raised in a system that kind of makes like a hate of learning, and so we all get wounded along the way. So I believe for me, it was the Book of Mormon that helped to heal these things. And I helped my kids. I said, okay, let's read. And I just taught them to read from the Book of Mormon. And then I supported them with some phonics and then read to them tons. And so that, anyway, so the environment of, did I confuse you? Did I share?
No, that was great. Yeah, the environment of learning, of curiosity, of being willing to dig deeper um and to record what you're learning. I think that that's so beautiful. And I love that that is an environment that we can all step into if we choose to. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking is the definition, the scriptural definition of what it means to be hard-hearted. I actually think there's a lot to that. If you go to the Book of Mormon and you look up hard-hearted, you can get some good ideas of what the writers meant when they use that phrase. But one of the things that is associated with that is that you have no questions. You're not asking anything. And that's big. And as you mentioned, I think that as a church culture, we start out with this understanding that we have a ton of truth here. And the problem with that is that we get really uncomfortable with asking questions because we think that we already have the answers.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is we have such a small piece of what there actually is. And every single principle of the gospel, we can dive deeper and get so much more out of it if we choose to.
Yeah. So
Um,
true.
Speaking about missions, I think that one mission that I feel there are many in our audience, perhaps that would resonate with this, is the mission of what it is to become a king or queen of the Gentiles. And that scriptural phrase, and that basically these are those who will help transition the covenant back to the house of Israel and help the Lord to fulfill the promises that he's made to this global family. And I firmly believe that those who will have this mission are going to be those who are willing to cultivate this environment of learning and of curiosity and of study and being completely unsatisfied with the degree of truth that we already have because we're constantly searching for more, constantly seeking to go deeper, to bring forth what the Lord says will be mysteries that have not been known since the foundation of the world. If you think about that, that's pretty daunting. Like,
Yeah.
that's very intimidating. We're into
Well,
the unknown here with Elsa, and
yeah.
that's a big task. And so the Lord is looking for those who are willing to go there, who are willing to go completely off the rails under his direction and guidance, obviously, to ask questions and to seek answers because somebody has got to be a part of that revelatory process. And I truly believe that that's a big part of that particular mission.
Yeah. And the quote I love about what you said, certainty prevents openness to inquiry.
Mm.
And if I have one thing to say, I just feel like it's the way we teach. Like we have a world of tellers, and we get that from the school system. It's very like lecture based. And I mean, I think it's just generally in our culture because it's been modeled. And I think that it was at church a lot until they started to do the discussion. They tried to do the round circle. We don't do circle in our ward anyway. And so it's harder to have a discussion when it's like one person at the front and then the audience. We have have had a lot of modeling of teachers who have all the answers and tell all the things.
Mm.
And what happens is it goes through, and we think we've heard it, so we think we know it, but it doesn't reach the heart. It's not a part of us. And when we have questions, um, when we go back to more of a question-based education, then we can develop that environment, and we can preserve that environment for those seeds to be sprouted and growing. And I love the Book of Mormon because I feel like it models for us so much of the way to teach in the number of stories that are used, and the
Mm.
number of illustrations, and the number of there's more story and question, I feel like, than there is a lecture.
Mhm.
Does that make
The
sense?
parables, right? The parables, right? That's exactly how the Lord taught, and one of the reasons that he said he did that is because the depth is infinite. You can always be getting more and more and more out of it.
Yeah.
And so, as soon as we assign a singular meaning to anything, whether it be a story, a phrase, a word, a scripture, a declaration from a leader, um, we need to learn to not be so satisfied with that and
Mhm.
to instead start seeking additional layers of meaning. And one of the cool things about truth, I was talking to someone, and this was kind of the analogy that came to me. I'm going to grab this. This is a speaker. Okay. I'm holding a speaker. If you think about the number of degrees that you can see the speaker from, like I'm looking at it from this angle, but I could be over here. I could look above it, underneath it, 360 degrees, plus we're in three-dimensional space. There's like a numberless number of ways to look at this inanimate
Mhm.
object. And the way I see it and the way that you see it are different, but neither one negates the other. Our views are both completely true. They're not complete and they're not perfect yet because there's still a lot of other ways to look at it. And so I think that one of the challenges, again, in developing this environment of learning is being willing to say, this is the way that I understand this thing and it's true, but it doesn't negate how you see it. And it doesn't mean that that's all there is to see of it. And when you have that perspective, you realize that truth is endless. Sometimes we use the phrase of like, well, truth is truth and there's only one truth and we're very definitive about it. But the reality is that truth is things as they are, and there's a lot of different ways to look at things as they are. And that is truth. So anyway, that was my soapbox.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's another aspect of that is like we could continue to love learning forever and just never and just be endlessly fed, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like there's a next step of an environment of stepping into living a covenant, or
Yeah.
stepping in and following a guideline
Yeah.
that it might feel not intuitive
Mm.
to wait, I love this learning. I just have this book list that I want to forever
Yep.
learn, but let's come back to aligning ourselves with God at a higher level
Yes.
in this more of a submission,
Right.
and carry our love of learning with it. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, and that's the commission, right? That, like, we're
Mhm.
doing all the seeking and learning with God. It's not just
Yeah,
completely
you,
untethered.
it, yeah, it can't just be like this. No, God's guiding me on this. Oh, just never really, I guess there's so much more that I'm sure God
Mhm.
wants to teach us, and understanding, and basically like coming to understand patterns and seeing that, whoa, like, and being able to see those patterns in us
Mhm. Mhm.
because we can see them in his word. And I, I feel like that carries with it that love.
So true. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and it's so true with the truth. There's so much more,
Yeah.
and that we can see different perspectives. Everyone's perspective is valuable,
Mhm.
and it's all going to be valuable, especially for them on their journey.
Yeah.
Like, like the truth that you come to discover is going to help you in your
Right.
individual journey. And then as I see it this way, I'm going to see it so different because of who I am.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? And it's a
totally.
kind of, and so that individual divine nature that we have, it really is just different, unique gifts and
Mhm.
genius. And like, look at what you're doing. This goes along with what your genius is. And what I'm doing, it goes along with the unique, genius that I have is different than yours.
And to be clear, like, I'm afraid people will hear this and be like, "You're destroying the foundations of eternity by saying that truth is subjective and blah blah blah." And
Oh,
that's not what we're saying, right? Like,
yeah.
obviously there are objective truths that are the rules that govern the universe, but frankly, I think that those are not really well comprehended by us on very many levels at all. Instead, what we're talking about, I think, is just that there is a side of truth where there's a lot more nuance and it's a lot more broad than we can possibly know. And so the idea of there being like your truth, there's actually some
Yeah,
truth. There's
yeah,
some
that's
truth
not
to
what I'm
that.
saying at all.
Right, right, right. There's some truth to that though, not as it transgresses eternal law, but to the degree that you are seeing things from a perspective that is valid and applicable to you and your mission, and I might see it
Yeah,
differently, and therefore I should not judge you, right? Like,
yeah. And I want to say it's like there's truth and it's so encompassing, like you said, for that
mhm.
speaker. But what I'm picking out in what's sparking from my soul is to like look at this part and to see it in
Yes.
this way.
Yes.
Because each of it goes back to salvation. Like we each have this individually guided salvation, but
Yeah.
throughout this journey there's a definite law
Yeah.
that is universally applicable for all of us in our unique journeys
Yep.
of salvation. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? It's like
Yes.
there's salvation and exaltation, and that apply to each of us individually. Anyway,
This is
that's what I
kind of
was saying.
where understanding God gets a little bit tricky, right? Because like God is letter of the law, black and white, clear as day, and there's a side of God that is also nuanced and very fluid and kind of bends the rules, tells Nephi to go kill a guy even though that's usually against the rules, right? And so but that was still correct. And so it's learning how to bring those things into balance, which is really hard, and that's why you need the spirit through
Well,
this process.
yeah, and it does take a little bit of that preparation in our
Mhm.
mind and heart to go
Yeah.
through the process ourselves to understand the difference between a preparatory law and a higher law, where
Mhm.
we learn through Christ and the Spirit. Does that make sense? And to learn
Yes.
like Adam and Eve, like there was two laws and they had to pass
Yes.
over, and that's what a transgression means, to
Mm,
pass over one law to partake of another.
right.
And so they seem paradoxical. They seem like contrary sometimes, or it's all or nothing. But
Mhm.
that's really in us as a person and where we see and
Yeah.
how like the healing within us that is needing to
Yeah.
like being able to expand our ability to to comprehend
Right. And that goes
different.
back to the very beginning of our conversation about experiencing a spiritual death and being reborn in God. Like that is
Yeah,
truly so foundational. Receiving that gift of the Holy Ghost in actuality is absolutely foundational to this whole discussion. And that is what kind of helps you navigate and understand like what is eternal, unbreakable law and
yeah,
what is just one perspective. And there are a million other perspectives that may be equally valid. Like that's a
yeah.
lot of work. So you definitely need the guidance.
Well, and it comes down to the heart. It
Yeah.
comes down to that, how how soft and open is our heart and flexible, and that he can teach us
Yeah.
from the heart. It's not some external thing.
Yeah. For me and also for other people, right? Like I've found that my ability to understand what is true is greatly guided by whether or not something increases godly love in me for someone else, or a willingness to not be judgmental, or a propensity to put away my pride and be humble. Like those are the fruits of true things. And so that's, I think, really important too to this conversation is when we're exploring this and trying to identify, what category do these things fall in, looking for those fruits are the things that will help us identify like, oh, yeah, this is probably true.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about Abraham? We've had like a whole conversation already.
Um, well, I feel like Abraham really models for us
Mm,
this life of commission,
yeah.
and we can kind of go through like a summary of his book or his story. Just
Hmm.
we can find it a lot of places, but in the Old Testament, Genesis 12 through 17 or 20, we can kind of see. So I have a slide that we can show
Yeah.
if for those who are visually that illustrates his life around what I call the sun horizon, in which
Yeah.
is ancient Hebrew letter. And I have a whole like intro class just about that one circle pattern.
Awesome.
Let's see. Okay, so um, this is a picture of a sun at horizon, and I have the symbol on top of the screen. And so the idea with this is, what do you see as you stand here at this peak on this mountain, looking off towards the sun? What's going to happen as you go towards the sun? Because our job is to go towards the sun.
Mm,
Um, at the end of the day, the sun will go down over the mountain, and all the light will condense towards the center. And what would that feel like for us? Let's say we live on this land. Let's say we're in Abraham's time and we have our flocks and our families out here. What would that feel like? It might feel cold. And if you have any thoughts, you can add them. Might feel like, oh, it's time to gather in. And so this is the time of day that begins the day. This is the time of in gathering, where we gather our family in, we gather into the home or into the tent, and we regroup, we rest, and we make sure we're safe from whatever's outside in the night, whether it's the wolves or whether it's time to sleep and rest. But as we go through life, we're following the sun, and if we're at the peak and we can see the sun, it gives us a vision of where we're going. Then what would that mean as we walk forward? We can see there's a downward slope into a valley, and then maybe another upward climb into a peak, another downward slope. And sometimes we're walking in the dark. Are we going to see that sun? Are we going to have that vision ahead of us? We might fall into a pit and get injured and go through really hard things. But there's other times that we can see the sun above and climb up to the top. So this is an illustration of how I see the symbol of the sun at horizon and what I've been taught. And so what I love to do is go to the
mm.
see it in this way, in this two-dimensional way. Although I know it's a three-dimensional thing, to go around the sun. And so as we look at Abraham's story, we are given a lot of clues about his life that show us that he went through a pattern of commission and lived, and he's living his life, this life that he's looking towards a greater life, like God's life. And so he lived in the land of Ur, and he at the time this area was the Egyptian Empire. So you have priests here and there. But there was something with him for him to come to understanding that he wanted what Noah had, what Noah's sons had. He wanted the blessing of the fathers. So he was taught somewhere, and some in, I don't know if we have all those records, but we know it. I feel like it's been revealed. And he got to the point where he covenants with his God, and he becomes this heir. of God and the one that would pass the knowledge forward. And so the tradition is that there was one that Adam was looking for to pass on and to carry this priesthood down, and he had to re-look, and his son Seth was like 500 years old before he wanted to make sure that he wasn't gonna have a hard thing like Cain and Abel. But so Abraham knew that this was his role to carry on for the family, and he was seeking this greater knowledge and becoming a follower of righteousness. And so you can imagine, like, you're like, yes, okay, I'm doing this, like, I want to do, I can go forward, I've learned all this stuff, right? But then he immediately, I have it in this way just to show, like, this summary, just to show how once we do take covenants, once we do grow to that level of commitment, then we get to experience new things and really get those challenged. And for him, it was this horrific thing of his father taking, they were sacrificing virgins, and then they are trying to now throw him in. And then what happens in that time is he was protected by an angel, and this angel destroys spelled it wrong, sorry, altar, and the priest. And so he witnessed God's hand in this very hard time, and he goes through lots of things. I didn't include everything, but he goes through to flee. He flees to this strange land. Eventually his family comes and catches up with him, and probably he forgives them, and then all these things happen with Lot, and he gives Lot the better land. And he again, sorry, this is an old slide. I gotta check the spelling on it. He builds this altar and makes sacrifices to his God. So you can see he's like, almost, I would say he's renewing his covenant, even though he's had like wandering all over, and he's wondering, when am I going to do this thing? When am I going to pass on what I have received to my children? He overcomes Lot in Egypt through he goes to Egypt, but he overcomes that, and then he battles for Lot, and that was another hard thing, but it shows his character. It's like throughout this journey, who he is. He's probably, like you're saying, being able to test his patience and his temperance and his brotherly kindness, and he's going through this pattern of becoming. And then when he finally does have a child, that he's excited, he's like, this is like his mission, to be the father of all nations. And then he has to face this very real trial, but he overcomes it and is blessed, and all of the nations are blessed. And I look at his life as this really great model for his unique, like, he had a unique mission and purpose, and it might not be the same as yours or mine, but he is going to follow the same pattern as you or I would. And there is a preparation time, and I think that we can put ourselves in to this pattern. It's a model that I believe it's a law that all of us follow. And we each are individually born with that divine genius. Those unique gifts that we come with are going to play a different story, but maybe the same kinds of patterns as we take covenants and step up in our ascension, right? But it's also our educational process, because we're seeking a life beyond. We're seeking God's life, and we're seeking the blessings of the fathers. And that life looks like in our world today, I feel like we kind of separate education and learning the gospel on our gospel path. And I feel like in Abraham, he shows us really how it is. It's all one. And think of the educational process he went through. I mean, he taught the Egyptians most likely from the scrolls or from about the heavens, and I'm sure he had records that he passed on, that he taught the followers. All of the tradition is that his records trained and were passed oral tradition over the next millennia. I mean, he definitely wrote, and he received, and he went through this, this internal process that we can't see on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
This is awesome. I love this. And the distinct pattern that you see here is creation, fall, atonement, right? Like this is the hero's journey that we're all supposed to be going through. And I really like how you emphasize the fact, and perhaps maybe these words can fit what you were saying, is that the process of us being called is the process of us also being qualified. And we will be called to the degree that we are willing to be qualified. And that includes learning, and that includes being tested through these various challenges, the things that God is going to ask us to face that are key to educating us about what our mission is and then preparing us to actually live and fulfill that mission. It's all a part of the same process. One thing that I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you were using the word covenant. And when we think about covenant, I think we think about the 5 temple covenants that we make. And obviously, I think that's a great place to start. But it feels to me that when each of us are striving to live a life of co-mission with the Lord, that we might feel at times impressed that there are covenants we have committed and made we've committed and made with the Lord that are specific to our mission. Things that we have covenanted to learn, things we've covenanted to do, people we've covenanted to influence. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of personal covenants with the Lord and how those may apply to understanding our mission and how to live in a state of co-mission with the Lord?
Well, I think it's relating to a higher law. And like Nephi had a personal covenant to go get the plates. He was willing. He went up to the mountain. He felt a call to go up to the mountain to receive the vision that Lehi, his father, had seen. And it was an invitation, and he took it, and he believed, and his heart was ripe and willing and open. And so I could see that he's making this personal covenant to go and do it. And that sets him apart naturally. And that brought on I feel like an inner knowing in him, that him understanding his role and his stewardship and what he was kind of growing into. I mean, I'm sure he didn't want to take that on. And so that's the first thing I think of, is just the unique, and I would feel like that was something he was predestined, or was that word, he made a covenant in heaven about. I can relate, just feeling like I think that I made a covenant, like this is why I'm on the earth, to share what I share in Foundation Builder Guide, and teaching others how to help, or just inviting others to step into helping them learn in an agency based way, and through the language of creation. Like I definitely, it's so unique and so random, if you look at it, like how did my mom just says, what, how did you, like, it's such a surprise for her. And I'm like, I know it's a surprise for me, but I didn't just coming to know me and who I am, I could see that it was something so unique to who my spirit is. Does that
Mm.
make sense? So I've got to, I don't know if that's what you're meaning, but
Hmm.
I think it definitely deals with the higher law where we are covenanting, like the spirit is directing us on those personal calls along our journey. And um, I like to look at this cycle that I shared, and you mentioned hero's journey. I like to look at it as Abraham as the model, and not the Greek heroes who are referred to as the heroes and the myths and sagas. That's where it's become popular through Joseph Campbell's book, A Journey of a Thousand Faces. I think that's the name. I know that the Greeks came after the Hebrews, and the Hebrews had this law a part of their life. And when I learned about it, I when I found it in the scriptures, I found it as a circle pattern. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't a hero's journey. This is how I just have to relate to it. But um, like everyone can find it in different ways, right? For me, I started calling it a pilgrim's course because Abraham is the pilgrim. He's wandering in a strange land without a home, and knowing that this wasn't his land and his home was beyond. And for him, he didn't even inherit his land at the time that he lived necessarily, like almost like Moses didn't inherit the land. So I just loved seeing it as a pilgrim. So with all of our pilgrimages towards Christ and towards that Son, then we do come to a point where that God's going to ask us for a unique thing individually to do. And I don't remember that I'm making a black and white covenant with a sign or anything like that. But I know inside of me, it's something that I need to do, and I need to figure it out. I need to keep working towards it, go through the valleys and the peaks it's just a drive in me. So that's all
Hmm.
I can say. That's how I've experienced it. I don't know about you or others,
Hmm.
but I definitely feel like this is something I came to the earth to share.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that so
Yeah.
much. I think you hit it right on the head. I think that if we were to look back on our life and look at the people that we've met and the situations we've been in and the things that we've learned, I believe that the spirit could help us identify, in hindsight and say, "Oh, that was something that I covenanted to do. That was someone that I covenanted with to have that experience with together." And I think that probably doing that would be a really wise exercise for all of us for a couple of reasons. One, because I think it would help us to see our mission more broadly, the thing that's kind of the theme of our life that we came here to do with the Lord. I also think that it would be really helpful from the perspective of helping us see that we are keeping the promises that we've made. That there are many things that we promised that we would do and we're doing here. And in hindsight, we can look back and say, "Oh, I did that and I survived. It was really hard, but I did it. And I promised that I would, and I did." And we can see that that's an acceptable sacrifice to the Lord.
Yeah, very much. Very much. I mean, I think that God loves us no matter what, if we do it or not. I
Hmm.
feel like He's just like, come on, little child, I love you no matter what, and I will lead you along. Just keep believing. And I came to feel that. Like at first I was, I feel like it was mostly in my asleep state, like feeling like I did it wrong and I did it all, like I messed up, and just as a mom or just wondering like what's wrong with me, right?
Mm.
And as I'm trying to work through the hard valleys, and then seeing on the other side, seeing that He's been waiting for me to go through this process to help me along, and I had to walk it. And I feel like he's that he's a loving God. And we're raised with a lot of people who are scared just like us and parents that are hard, we just are trying to figure it out. We've never been parents before. My parents never had been parents before. And I mean, I was number 6 of 7, but my mom was like raised in a broken home and was in foster care. And I, I, I just get that. But sometimes we put on that who our dad was, or his
Mm,
sternness, or his lovingness. We say that's who God is. That's like a child's response to our view of God. And so it takes a process of maturity and healing to see God in who He really is, and to release all of that,
mm,
that
yeah.
misunderstanding. And that's just layer by layer of relearning, and keep on learning, and make sure, like, helping our heart to recognize that we don't know it yet. Like, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything, and
So true.
the more you
So
want to
true.
learn.
And if you're not experiencing that, then start asking more questions.
Yeah.
Start asking the Lord more questions and he'll guide you. But I agree. I think that probably the first thing that I would encourage anyone to discover is to learn how God really is. And that's an infinite question that we can't come to the bottom of right now. But understanding that God's love is truly as unconditional and permeating and unavoidable as anything could ever possibly be, is so foundational to us being willing to take this journey with God and accept that I do have a mission and purpose, and not only that, but I have a partner, and my partner is faithful and is trustworthy
Mhm.
and loves me perfectly no matter how many times I fail, and that because of that, I know that at the end of the day, this we can have success, not because of me and who I am, but because we worship a God who is a God of love, and there's nothing that we could do to destroy that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Thank
It's so
you.
true.
Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts. If someone wanted to find you and more information about the Foundation Builders Guide and your mission and the work that you're doing, where could they find you?
You can go to houseofthebook.org, and that is a term. There's a Hebrew term for the Hebrew model of education, and it represents a foundation, the foundational phase of a child's life, that putting our education on God, or on the law. And so it's houseofthebook.org. And for a translation, the words I received was foundation builder guide, to be a guide, and not, like, we have a more of a Hebraic learning environment that we pass on, an oral tradition of learning, and then learning how to invite others to learn in that same Hebraic way. But so foundation builder is like almost like the house of the book, like putting your foundation on the book, which is the law,
Mm,
and then becoming a people of the book, a people of the law, people who can live in the covenant, people who can, um, live and pattern their life after that law. So that's a couple various meanings of it. I know um, it's a different words, a different language,
yeah.
but that's what
Well,
it refers to and stuff. So
well, we love Hebrew around here, and there's so much value that we get when we look at the gospel through that Hebraic lens. So we'll be sure to put those links in the episode description. But Katie, thank you again so much for sharing your thoughts. And I believe that this will be meaningful to people. I encourage that each of us counsel with the Lord and say, Lord, what is our mission and how can we develop a co-mission with one another? I think that the Lord is really anxious for those who are willing to step into that space and do that personal work that we need to do so that we really can become partners with Him, servants and handmaids, and joint heirs. At the end of the day, that's the goal, right?
yeah,
So
definitely on our individual journey. Yeah, very much. Thank you so much for having me and for the invitation. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Are you just reading the scriptures, or have you learned to search them? If you haven't switched to using scripture notes, you haven't discovered the power of a tool designed for searching the scriptures. This incredible tool allows you to pull together search results from the standard works, apocryphal texts, and freedom documents into a collection you can study from, digging deeper with instant references to Blue Letter Bible, the LDS Citation Index, Webster's 1828 Dictionary, and more. You can even import your gospel library notes as well. Sign up now for a free trial at scripturenotes.com.